In a quiet, little-known corner of town, a seemingly insignificant piece of land came up for sale. Once a bustling farm, the property had long since fallen into disrepair, with a weather-beaten house and acres of overgrown weeds. It was the kind of place most people would overlook, with nothing to attract the eye but rusted gates and the faint scent of neglect. But then, an unusual decision was made. The bank, eager to unload the property as quickly as possible, slashed its price to an almost laughable sum, $10. Yes, just $10, a figure so low it seemed more like a joke than a legitimate sale price. In fact, some townsfolk assumed it was a mistake, a typo in a real estate listing. After all, who would be foolish enough to buy land that had clearly been abandoned for years? Yet, for some, the price tag was irresistible. One curious buyer, a young couple looking to escape the high cost of city life, saw it as a quirky opportunity. They weren't looking for a mansion or prime farmland, just a patch of earth they could call their own. To them, the price was too good to pass up, and so they ventured out to inspect the land, half expecting to find nothing more than a run-down shack and a few stray animals. Little did they know, this $10 property would lead them into a discovery more astonishing than they could ever imagine. As they set foot on the land, they couldn't have known that the true value of this forgotten piece of earth lay not in its dilapidated buildings, but in what was hidden beneath the surface, something far more extraordinary than any of them had bargained for. The young couple arrived at the property on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day that promised a fresh start, though neither of them could have predicted how literal that would turn out to be. Their car crunched over the gravel driveway, which, like the rest of the land, seemed neglected, a few weeds growing through the cracks, the faint outline of tire tracks long faded. The house itself was an old, two-story structure, sagging under the weight of years gone by. Shutters hung crookedly, and the once white paint had peeled into a patchwork of grays and browns. To the untrained eye, the place was little more than a forgotten relic, its charm lost to time. The couple exchanged a glance, both wondering if they had made a mistake. $10 for this? But then, they reminded themselves, it wasn't about the house. It was the land they were after: space to breathe, room to grow, a place where they could put down roots. The house, with all its flaws, was just a bonus. They walked around the overgrown yard, stepping carefully over uneven ground. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint odor of rust and mildew that clung to the building. Weeds, tall and thick, had overtaken much of the lawn, but the landscape had a wild, untamed beauty. It was a place that could be restored, they thought. Maybe with some work, it could be more than just an old house. It could be their future. It was when they wandered toward the back of the property that things began to take an unexpected turn. There, tucked behind a row of neglected trees and half hidden by creeping vines, stood a barn. At first glance, it seemed just as abandoned as the rest of the land, its wooden walls chipped and worn, its roof sagging in places. But something about it drew them closer, an unspoken pull. Maybe it was the sound of faint noise, barely audible over the rustling of leaves that seemed to echo from within. They approached the barn cautiously, pushing aside the thick vines that had crept over the entrance like a curtain of secrecy. The heavy door creaked loudly as they swung it open, and the first thing they noticed was the smell, the sweet, earthy scent of hay mixed with the unmistakable musk of animals. Inside, the barn was dim, the only light filtering in through cracks in the walls and roof. But what caught their attention wasn't the crumbling hayloft or the dusty tools. It was the movement, the faint rustle of hooves against the straw. There, in the far corner of the barn, stood two horses. The couple froze, unsure whether they were dreaming or if the animals were just a trick of the light. But as their eyes adjusted to the dimness, they could see them clearly: two beautiful, majestic creatures, their coats glistening despite the years of neglect. One was a sleek black stallion, his muscular frame poised with elegance; the other, a gentle chestnut mare, with a soft, kind gaze that seemed to meet theirs. The horses were clearly well cared for, their bodies strong and healthy, their coats free of the dust and dirt one might expect in such a neglected barn. Whoever had left them here had made sure they were fed and cared for. They had been left in a stable, not abandoned to wander. But the mystery only deepened. Why had these horses been hidden away? And more importantly, how had the bank missed them entirely? The couple exchanged a stunned look, their minds racing to piece together the mystery. They hadn't come looking for horses, and certainly hadn't expected to find any. But as they stood in the barn, the realization began to dawn. This property, seemingly worthless and forgotten, was hiding something far more valuable than they could have ever imagined. With a sense of awe and trepidation, they slowly approached the horses, unsure of how to react. The stallion regarded them with wary eyes, his nostrils flaring slightly, while the mare gave a soft whinny, as if to welcome them into her world. It was a moment of unexpected connection, the beginning of a story that would unfold in ways neither of them could have predicted. The couple spent the next few days immersed in a whirlwind of research, trying to piece together the history of the land that now seemed far more mysterious than it had a week ago. Their curiosity had been piqued the moment they discovered the horses, but as the days went by, they found themselves diving deeper into the story behind the property, determined to understand how such magnificent animals had come to be hidden away on land that everyone had forgotten. Their first stop was the town's local library, where the librarian, a woman named Mrs. Timmons, was eager to assist them. She had lived in the town for decades and had witnessed its many changes, but even she was shocked by the discovery. "The property you're asking about," she said, flipping through a series of dusty old records. "That land's been empty for years, but there's a story there, a rather odd one." She handed them a thick folder filled with old newspaper clippings, tax records, and property deeds. The first thing they learned was that the farm had once belonged to a man named Elias Hawk, a well-known horse breeder who had made a name for himself in the equestrian world. His horses were famous for their unmatched beauty, speed, and intelligence, and many wealthy buyers from around the country sought to purchase his prized bloodlines. Hawk had been a respected figure in the local community, and for a time, his farm was the jewel of the area. But as they read further, the story began to take a darker turn. Elias Hawk's rise to fame had been swift, but his fall was equally dramatic. It started with a series of bad investments, one after another. A failed venture into breeding show dogs left him with mounting debts, and when his prized horses failed to sell at auction, things took a turn for the worse. His farm, once a thriving hub of activity, began to deteriorate. Rumors swirled about his health, his mental state, and his increasing desperation. The last newspaper article they found was dated several years ago, and it told of Hawk's mysterious disappearance. According to the report, Elias Hawk was last seen leaving his house late one night. He was never found, and the property was left abandoned, with only his horses remaining. The police never found any trace of him, and his debts were eventually bought out by the bank, which then seized the property. But the horses, they remained. The couple's research didn't stop there. They spoke to the few remaining residents who remembered Elias Hawk, all of whom spoke of the man with a mixture of admiration and caution. He was a genius in his field, but his obsession with breeding the perfect horse, coupled with his financial decline, had taken a toll on him. Some said he had grown paranoid in his later years, hiding the horses from potential buyers for fear they would be taken away as part of his financial ruin. Others whispered that the horses were his last connection to the life he had once known, his legacy. As they dug deeper, the couple learned that Hawk had once bred two horses in particular, the very same ones that now stood in the barn. These horses were known throughout the equestrian world for their exceptional genetics. Their bloodlines had been carefully curated, and they were meant to be the cornerstone of Hawk's fortune, but his sudden disappearance left their future uncertain. A few older townsfolk recalled seeing Elias Hawk walking toward the barn late at night, often accompanied by the horses, as if he were talking to them or seeking solace in their presence. Some believed he saw the horses as a final, living tribute to his achievements, a legacy that would survive him. The discovery struck the couple in ways they couldn't fully explain. It was no longer just about a dilapidated property and two horses. It was about a man's obsession, his fall from grace, and his desperate attempt to hold on to something that was slipping away. The horses were not merely animals. They were living symbols of a bygone era, of a man who had once been at the pinnacle of success, but whose life had crumbled in the shadows of his own ambition. As they sat together in the library, piecing together these fragmented details, a new understanding dawned on them. The horses were more than just a part of the property. They were an inheritance, a living legacy of a man who had poured everything into creating them, only to lose it all in the end. And now, the couple realized, it was their turn to be a part of that story, to care for the horses and, perhaps, restore the honor of Elias Hawk's once proud name. The mystery of the $10 property was slowly unraveling, revealing more than they had ever expected. It wasn't just a story of land and horses. It was a tale of ambition, loss, and redemption. And they were only just beginning to understand the true value of what they had stumbled upon. The couple quickly realized that taking care of the horses wasn't as simple as they had hoped. Their initial excitement and the allure of the unexpected discovery soon gave way to the hard reality of responsibility. Though they had no prior experience with horses, they were determined to give these magnificent creatures the care they deserved. However, the learning curve was steep, and the obstacles seemed to multiply by the day. The first challenge was feeding. Though the barn was stocked with hay, it wasn't nearly enough to last through the winter, and they quickly learned that proper horse feed wasn't cheap. The couple had never even considered the expense of maintaining 2 horses. It wasn't just hay, they needed supplements, fresh water, and specialized feed to ensure the horses stayed healthy and strong. Their modest savings were quickly stretched thin as they researched what was required and scrambled to purchase the necessary supplies. The horses' diet wasn't the only thing they had to learn about. Grooming was another challenge. The stallion, a proud and muscular creature, had a thick coat that required regular brushing. Every day, the couple spent hours trying to clean the horses, combing out tangles and dirt that had built up from their time in the barn. The mare, gentle and patient, seemed to understand the effort the couple was putting in, but the stallion was more difficult. He had a stubborn streak, and getting him to stand still long enough to be groomed often felt like a battle of wills. There were moments when the couple felt frustrated, but they pressed on, knowing that the horses needed them, whether they succeeded or not. The barn itself presented yet another set of challenges. The wooden structure, while sturdy in some places, had several areas that were starting to rot. The roof leaked when it rained, and the floor was uneven, with patches of dry rot and splinters. The couple set to work fixing what they could, but the repairs were slow and costly. Every nail they hammered, every board they replaced, seemed to reveal more problems. It was a race against time to make the barn safe enough for the horses to stay warm and dry during the winter months. Despite the physical labor, the emotional toll was just as heavy. The couple had hoped the horses would be a joy, a symbol of the new life they were trying to build, but at times, the weight of it all felt overwhelming. They were exhausted, both physically and financially. There were days when they felt they were in over their heads, when the horses seemed to sense their stress, and the stallion's stubbornness only amplified their doubts. One particular morning, the mare came down with a mild colic, a painful condition that made her restless and unable to eat. The couple, already stretched thin, didn't know what to do. They rushed her to the nearest vet, praying she would pull through. The long wait in the clinic felt like an eternity, and their anxiety was palpable. They sat in silence, trying to console each other, but neither could shake the fear that something might be wrong with the mare. When the vet finally called them in, they learned that the mare had a mild case of colic and would be fine with rest and some medication. It was a relief, but it also highlighted just how little they knew about caring for horses. They weren't just responsible for the animals' everyday needs. They were also learning to navigate the unpredictable world of animal care, where every small problem could quickly become a major crisis. Despite the hardships, there were moments of quiet joy. After a long day of chores, they would sit in the barn, watching the horses as they peacefully grazed in the fields. There were times when the stallion, once so uncooperative, would nuzzle the man's shoulder, as if acknowledging the bond they had begun to form. The mare, always gentle, would rest her head on the woman's lap, seeking comfort and companionship. Slowly, these moments of connection made the struggles feel worthwhile. It wasn't just about the work or the money they were pouring into the property. It was about the sense of responsibility that had been placed on their shoulders, the bond they were forming with these horses, and the understanding that they were part of something much larger than themselves, a legacy that demanded respect and care. It wasn't long before the bank took notice of the couple's unexpected find. A few weeks after they moved in, they received a letter, a formal request for them to come to the bank's local branch. The letter was polite but firm, stating that the bank needed to address a discrepancy regarding the property's sale. The couple, already anxious about the upkeep of the land, feared the worst. Had the bank realized their mistake? Were the horses considered part of the estate's assets, and could they now be taken away? When they arrived at the bank, they were greeted by a stern-faced representative. "We weren't aware of the horses," the representative explained, glancing over paperwork. "This was an oversight. The property was supposed to be cleared before the sale." The couple, worried, explained how they had been caring for the animals, describing the bond they'd formed with the horses. The representative's tone softened. After a brief conversation, the couple managed to convince the bank that the horses were part of the property's value and that they were well cared for. Finally, after much back and forth, the bank agreed to allow them to keep the horses with the condition they purchased the animals outright at market value. With the bank's approval in hand, the couple's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The financial burden of purchasing the horses was steep, but they managed to make it work, using their savings and securing a small loan. It felt like an investment not just in the horses, but in the life they had dreamed of when they first bought the property. Over the months that followed, the land slowly transformed. The barn was fully repaired, the house was weatherproofed, and the horses, once hidden away in the shadows of neglect, flourished. They became more than just animals. They were symbols of the couple's resilience and determination. Every morning, as they fed and groomed the horses, they marveled at how far they had come. The couple's bond with the horses deepened. The stallion, once stubborn and aloof, now followed them around the property, as if he understood they were part of his family. The mare, always gentle, would nuzzle their hands, a quiet reminder of the trust they had built. In the quiet evenings, when the sun dipped behind the hills, the couple would sit together, watching the horses graze peacefully. They knew their lives would never be the same. They had found something far more precious than a piece of land. They had found purpose.